normally what I would do is I'd start off by introducing my guest, but yesterday, every time I introduce Brandon, people are like, come on, man, we know Brandon. Everybody knows Brandon. Everybody knows the Humans of New York. So all I'm going to say is a couple of quick things. Brandon is obviously the founder of Humans of New York. If you don't know what Humans of New York are, or if you don't know what it is, I'm not sure what you're doing here. So I'll just say that. He's got over 12 million followers on Facebook, and he's also voted times 30, one of 30, under 30, who are world changers. So, Brandon Stanton. We've had some great conversations since yesterday, and we'll just do the conversations in front of you guys. The first thing that I want to talk about, and then obviously we'll give you guys some time as well to ask questions, because I know that Brandon's done a talk yesterday and he's done an interview as well. But this is an opportunity for you guys to ask what you want to ask of Brandon. The first question that I have, Brandon, is: so you set out to do Humans of New York in 2010, and you've taken countless pictures, and we'll get to the numbers. But I'll tell you what, when I start Googling Brandon Stanton, it's so disproportionate to the amount of information on the people in the pictures that you take.
Well, when I was first starting Humans of New York, I hadn't really been photographing very long at all. I certainly didn't have, a name for myself, and I had a kind of decision very early on whether I could, do I try to build a brand around myself, or do I try to build a brand around a concept, which is telling the stories of people in New York City. And I thought it would be much more powerful to kind of build a brand around my concept. And so ever since then, I've been very careful. I kind of like to stay in the background and keep the people front and center and keep things about the stories. And so, it's actually when people come up to me on the street, they really don't say, hey, Brandon, nice to meet you. Like, Humans of New York, like Humans of New York. And, I like that because it kind of shows that, over these kind of, with how big Humans of New York has gotten, how many people follow it now, it is still about the stories, and the stories are front and center, and I think that's important to keep it that way.
But obviously there are other ways as well. There's other people that actually use their pages predominantly to showcase, their lives.
Right.
And some platforms lend itself better to doing that than others.
Right.
My second question to you is: you've been called a culture spotter.
Okay.
What does that mean? I know you take pictures of people in the New York streets, and you've done things around the world, which we'll get to. But tell me about, what it is that you capture these stories.
There's so many different things that, I could possibly be called, whether it's a photographer or a storyteller or, a culture spotter. I prefer storyteller. If any culture comes out of Humans of New York, it's not because I was attempting to identify it and showcase it. I think it just kind of comes naturally out of stopping random people on the street and kind of asking them, intimate details about their lives. I'm not trying to spot anything or trying to show anything. If anything, I'm just trying to reflect the person's story that's right in front of me. People ask me, all the time, what are you trying to show with Humans of New York? Or what does Humans of New York show about humanity? And I always answer that I'm not really trying to say anything about humanity, because the moment I have something that I'm trying to portray with my work, I feel like you kind of stop listening to the person in front of you. So, if there's any culture that's featured on Humans of New York, or if there's any culture that's in my ability to spot, I think it just comes from listening to people and listening to their stories.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing because, a lot of times when you travel, people say that's kind of the biggest cultural lesson that you get.
Right.
And given the sort of different types of people that live in New York and those stories that you cover, people feel like they learn a lot about the world. And I guess that's where the culture spotter title comes in.
Yeah, well, and if there's one place to spot culture, it's, New York City. And it's just like Dubai. New York is very unique in that it's such a intersection of different cultures and people, and it just being that it's the first stop, and it's just so many people that have immigrated to the United States is New York City, and so you do have such kind of an influx of cultures, and so just by stopping people and finding out their stories, you do get tons of culture just naturally. Yeah,
fantastic. I mean, we talk about these stories and these moments, and there's so much that has actually been lost in history. I mean, Noah's Ark. Nobody knows what really Noah's Ark looks like. Nobody knows the Ottoman Egypt period. Nobody knows what the first ever Olympic Games was like. Nobody knows what the Trojan horse actually looked like. These are all things that have become legendary. They're legends.
Right.
And with social media, what's happened is we're at a time where we're probably never, ever going to lose anything like that. Ever again. There's not going to be a situation where something that's happening right now is going to be lost. And 20 years down the line, we say, oh my God, the Arab Social Media Influencers Summit. Everything is captured right now.
Right.
So when we talk about moments, and a lot of your pictures have been called capsules in a moment in time. Tell me about these moments that you capture. What does it mean to you?
Well, I kind of thought one thing that people say about Humans of New York a lot is that it's kind of a living history. That you're kind of telling the history of a story because you're or history of a city at a certain time by stopping all these people on the street and telling their stories. But I sometimes wonder that it's think about the amount of content that's being created right now. Everybody's telling stories at all time. We have even less time to go back and look at the past now because there's so many stories that are being told all around us. So I sometimes wonder, with how fast things move forward, even though I'm stopping these, hundreds and thousands of people and kind of telling their stories in the streets of New York, I wonder if there's anybody ever is going to have the time to go back and look at all of them because there's so many that are constantly being produced and the world is moving forward so quickly. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting. Speaking of history, one really cool thing was a bunch of high school students in New York City collaborated with the New York Historical Society, and they had just dug up a time capsule that was buried 100 years ago. It was the official New York City time capsule. And so they buried another one for the next 100 years.
Oh, wow.
And they chose the Humans of New York book to put in there.
Oh,
so,
fantastic.
Yeah,
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Amazing.
And so, there is a certain living history to it, I guess, just to kind of get the stories of average people, in a real-time basis. I guess time will tell about how interesting it is to people in the future.
Well, I'll tell you what, Brandon. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job in terms of, the viewership and the followership and the listenership that you have, obviously, via your, whether it's your Facebook page or your Instagram page. I mean, you're over 12 million followers on Facebook. You're over 2 million followers, or just under 2 million followers on Instagram.
Right.
You set out to do 10,000 photos.
Right.
Where are you on 10,000 right now, first of all?
Right. I've lost count now. I think I'm probably getting pretty close.
Okay.
I stopped because when I first started Humans of New York, the whole reason I moved to New York is my goal was I was going to take 10,000 portraits of people and I was going to plot them on a map of the city. That was my entire goal. And so, everything at first was kind of revolved around getting to that number of 10,000. I used to have a counter on the top of my website that would count up to 10,000, and my whole goal was to get that number. And, my idea was, and I was very new to social media. I had been in finance and I had just lost my job, so I didn't really know anything about blogging. And, my thought was, and it was very naive looking back, my thought was, I'm going to get 10,000 portraits and I'm going to plot them on a map of the city, and then I'm going to use that and approach newspapers and try to get press, and I'm going to try to bring my attention to my work in that way. And through that process, I realized that was not the correct way of thinking. If you want to build an audience, what you need to do is you need to be a consistent provider of content on a daily basis. It's not about creating this huge work. It's about creating something every day and being very consistent. I always said that I wanted Humans of New York, once I realized that, to be someone's morning cup of coffee, where every morning they wake up, they drink their coffee, they look at Humans of New York. And so it became much less about hitting that 10,000 mark and much more about learning a few stories every single day and being a reliable place that people could find good content every single day. And, if there's one reason that Humans of New York has gotten so big, I think that consistency has a very, very big part to do with it, because I go out and work every single day. I make sure that no matter what, even now that I'm in Dubai for a few days, I work double shifts for a few days before I could come here so that the content would never stop. And that for millions of people around the world have learned to trust in me and in Humans of New York that every single day when they go and check the blog, there will be content there. And so, consistency is what I learned was much more important than any sort of total goal.
That's a true story. Last night I told Brandon, you want to stay a few more days and we can show you around Dubai with the Dubai tourism team. And he's like, I can't. I have to get back to work.
Yeah.
So, true story. But I want to ask, in your quest to hit those numbers and your bigger overall objectives, was there a time when it became too overwhelming? I mean, this is over the last 5 years, but was there a time where you felt, God, this is tough?
Well, I mean, it all kind of goes back to, what I just said. I realized, back to consistency, I realized coming up that the one thing that I can control, and this is, I think important for anybody who's trying to build something. The one thing that you can control is, say you're trying to write a book. You can't control if you're going to write the next great Middle Eastern novel or the next great American novel. You can control how hard you work. It's the only thing that is everybody has that they can control. You can't control how smart you are. You can control how hard you work. So the one thing I knew as Humans of New York started to grow, I didn't know where it was going. I couldn't control if one day it would be a best-selling book. I couldn't control if one day it would be an overwhelming success. But I could control that every day I would go out, I would stop a certain amount of people on the street, and I would learn a certain amount of stories. And you ask, does it ever get overwhelming? The bigger Humans of New York gets, my inbox now is crazy. The collaborations, partnerships, do this, expand your brand this way, partner with us, and do this. And the more and more offers and opportunities that come in, the more and more I have to narrow my focus back to where it started, which is that one thing I can control, which is going out and working every single day. I can't control if Humans of New York is going to go from 15 million fans to 30 million fans. But I know what got me here is working every day, going out and being a consistent source of content. And so the bigger and bigger and the more overwhelming things get, the more I kind of narrow my focus, and that kind of helps center me. Yeah.
And that's great, Brandon, because most of the people that I talk to about being social talk about predominantly they talk about two factors. I mean, one is content that we just talked about, and it's really creating content that's relevant for the audience that you have, right? The other thing that a lot of people talk about is something that you've talked about before. I've seen is about reinventing yourself as well. Because, there is no book that tells you do social media or do Facebook or do Instagram this way.
Right.
There's something that you do and you test it and you try it and you see what works and you kind of change. So
and
tell us about your experience there, please.
Well, I mean, that's one thing that's very interesting about social media is you get immediate feedback on your work. It's if you're writing a novel, you're going to work on this for 2.5 years, you're going to release it to the public, and your first feedback comes after 2.5 years of work, and you can incorporate that feedback into your next novel if you want. But social media has always given me a very real-time indicator of how people are interacting with my work, and it has allowed me to kind of improvise and innovate as I go along, as I find out what people connect with on a more and more deeper level. As I explained, Humans in New York, when I first started, was a collection of 10,000 photographs. That was the goal. I was going to take 10,000 photos. And it was through doing that I learned that it wasn't the photos that people were really interacting with, it was the stories. And so once I learned that, I tried to get better and better and better at telling these people's stories, learning how to interview someone to get a very kind of intimate story out of them. And then the better and better I got at that, the more and more people connected with the work. And so, I'm constantly evolving. I'm constantly trying to innovate and find out in what ways can I make Humans of New York offer something even more unique and stand out even more in a way that it will continue to grow. And social media kind of gives you a very interesting laboratory within which to do that, because you will get constant feedback and constant, commentary on your work.
Look, that leads me to my next question, which is, if this were 10 years ago, and there was very little social media, what would the Humans of New York be without social media? What would Brandon Stanton be without?
It would be impossible. what happened with Humans of New York would have been absolutely impossible 10 years ago because I didn't have any photography experience. I was a failed bond trader. And so in order to get anything near the audience that I have now, I would have had to have basically earned the approval of gatekeepers, people who kind of controlled access to people, which are magazine editors, people who ran television shows. And these people would have taken a look at me and they said, so what's your photography experience? Oh, I just started, but I've got a great idea. And they would have been like, no, absolutely not. We've got these people over here with these degrees and these people that are famous. And so, what social media has done is it has basically broken down your need to impress a very few, very distinguished amount of tastemakers that control access to large amounts of people. And so now someone with a good idea and a willingness to work hard can go directly to an audience and build it up. So yeah, even 10 years ago, Humans of New York wouldn't have even been possible in any aspect, I don't think.
How, on that note, how do you actually use all your channels, Brandon?
Right.
You have obviously your Facebook page, you have your blog, you have your Instagram pages.
Right.
How do you use all that in tandem to kind of portray your message?
It's very simple. I just repost. I would say the community is probably centered the most on Facebook. That is where the commenting system is the most geared towards lively conversation. So, it's where I have the largest audience. So everything goes on Facebook first, and that's where I think most people follow Humans of New York. Second being Instagram, which also has a comment section. I think one of the big parts of Humans of New York has been the discussion that emerges after each one of the photos. There's sometimes hundreds and thousands of comments, and that's mostly centered in Facebook. So, I'm always, Instagram's growing so fast that, I'm putting more and more attention into what's going on over there, but it's still primarily Facebook.
But your numbers are phenomenal, Brandon. I mean, I look at all the pictures that you post on Facebook, and 12 million something likes on the page. But if you look at every single picture, you're talking about 100,000, 150,000 likes on each picture. And I don't know if you guys read this story about the young boy in Brooklyn, whose inspiration was his teacher, Vidal. 1 million likes on that photo alone. I mean, that's massive. Yeah. That's massive. And we talked earlier about your fans and the people that like your page, and they are so global. Because you told me something yesterday. You're like, I have a lot of fans in Pakistan. Yeah. How do you actually continue to develop content that that your fans around the world will appreciate and continue to follow? How does that happen?
It's not the result of a concerted effort. The focus has always been on the content. I think people fall down a lot in social media by trying to focus on developing an audience and saying, oh, I'm going to make this strategy to appeal to this group of people, or this strategy to appeal to this group of people. Only one thing appeals to people, and that's good content. And, I think the people that have the most lasting, the deepest engagement, and the most lasting success are people who focus primarily on the content. And then everything else kind of falls into place. I didn't go to any social media seminars, and I didn't, read these books and do that. I focused on how to tell the best stories possible. And my audience grew, and my influence grew as I got better as a storyteller, not as I got better as a social media operator. Because there's very few ways to game the system, because in the most transparent sense, social media is going to connect with people with what they want to find. It's much more geared to letting people discover what they want and letting people discover you than it is to letting you discover other people. So it's a law of attraction. It's not something where you can kind of lasso people into following your stuff. And if you want to have that law of attraction work in your favor, your focus needs to be, again, on your work. What you can control? You can control your work. And what comes out of that work is going to get better and better and better the narrower and narrower your focus is. And I think one of the best demonstrations of this are famous bands. How many bands have come out with a first album that is just absolutely fantastic, and then they come out with a second album and it just falls off huge? Why is that? It's because before they got famous, all they did was sit in their basement and think about music. And then they got famous and they get invited to all these parties and they get doing all these huge shows and they're doing all these interviews and they're thinking about fame and how to manage their career, and they're not thinking about the music that attracted the fan base in the first place. And I think that's just such a demonstration. It's just, if you want to have a big presence on social media, ask yourself, why would people want to pay attention to me? And focus on the one thing that you can control, which is the work you do and the content you generate.
Absolutely. I think, you said the word influence, and this is the day and age of the influencer on social media. And, as you gain a very large followership, you become somebody that people listen to, that imitate, and that's a very big responsibility. Today, you have a very large responsibility. How do you feel about that responsibility? What is it? Define it for us and tell us, what it makes you do.
Yeah, and me and you were talking about this before we came out here very casually. We were talking about what it means to have influence on social media, and I have. I've raised a lot of money, and it can be argued that I have a large degree of influence with my audience. But, I'm very careful to recognize that the influence I have is in a very certain sphere. People have given me permission to tell them stories. That's the influence that they've given me. They've liked my page as a storyteller. And so, they didn't like my page for me to tell them about my politics or religious views or tell them how to vote or how to act or what to do. They have given me influence to tell them stories, and I'm very careful to honor that. And I don't intrude myself into people's news feeds in order to do anything else but tell stories. I don't market on my page. I don't promote things. I've turned down tons of partnerships and sponsorship offers just because people have given me permission to tell them stories, and that's all I want to do. And I view that as kind of a sacred covenant. And any influence that I have comes out of the stories I tell. If you'll look at the money that's been raised on Humans of New York, which has been millions of dollars, the money is raised as a result of stories being told, not as a result of me saying, please people, I think this is a good cause, please give money. It's me telling a story and people deciding on their own that it's something they want to support.
Fantastic. You did obviously a lot of your work in New York. I mean, the blog is called The Humans of New York. But you've also recently, in the last couple of years, done a 50-day tour sponsored by the United Nations.
Right.
Again, to tell stories in some of the difficult places around the world.
Right.
Tell us about that and what that's done for Humans of New York and yourself as a brand globally.
Yeah, well, the trip that he's talking about is this summer I did a 2-month collaboration with United Nations where I went to 12 different countries in 2 months and did really the exact same thing that I, do on the streets of New York, which is just stop random people on the streets with the help of a translator and find out about their lives. I went to Iraq, I went to South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ukraine, Mexico, India, Vietnam, all kinds of places. And again, did that raise the global profile of Humans of New York? I'm sure, but how did it raise it? By me focusing on stories and just telling stories, but just telling them in different places. And it was, again, just kind of an organic byproduct of me just doing the one thing I know how to do, which is, approach people on the street and telling their stories, because that's where my influence is. And if, the audience grew bigger, because of that, it's because I was telling more compelling stories.
Tell us about a time, your proudest moment, whether it's on social media or personally through your journey.
Yeah.
And Humans of New York.
Well, that's,
you must have many, but I mean.
Well, recently, I was allowed to go in the Oval Office and interview President Obama, which was obviously a highlight. But, probably the most exciting for me was because, Humans of New York was already very, successful, and I was given the opportunity to do that. I could go back and say when the book became a #1 New York Times bestseller, because I had a hard time getting anyone to even publish my book. I think I pitched it to about 7 publishers. Only one even really made an offer, and now it's been on the bestseller list for 30 weeks. It's been a huge success. But just a few months before it became a #1 New York Times bestseller, nobody even wanted to give me an offer. That's how fast things kind of evolved. But then even going back further than that, I think the times that were the most exciting for me is when I went from complete anonymity to those first few fans, because, the reason it's so hard to be an artist is that you have to do so much work before anybody will pay attention to you. And that's one thing that's tough in the world of social media, is that there's this illusion of virality, that, all I have to do is have this really good idea and then I'm going to be famous and people are going to follow my work. And so, what happens is you get a lot of people focusing a little bit of their effort on making content and then a lot of their effort on promoting, and say, like my stuff, share my stuff. And then they make a few things and people don't like it or share it, and then they quit. When in reality, the only way to make a sustainable presence on social media or anywhere else is to have a very long proven track record of creating content. And you have to do that before anybody is paying attention. Just like with anything, the lion's share of the effort of Humans of New York, the thousands of photos I took first, were before anybody was paying attention. And those were the hardest times, because I'm doing all of this work in anonymity before anyone cared. And so, for me, the times that were the most exciting for me and the most fulfilling were after all those months and months and almost a year of working every single day and taking photos, when I noticed those first few people following me on Facebook that weren't my family members, that weren't my friends, people that I didn't know. And because that was for the very first time, I saw a correlation between the work I was doing and how fast I was growing. And at that point, when I saw those first few names start to come in, I knew that all I had to do was go out and work every single day, and it was going to continue to grow. I just didn't know how fast it was going to start growing. Yeah.
Brandon's very modest. His book actually, it made the New York Times bestseller in 1 week. So phenomenal job, really, Brandon, on that. There's a lot of humans of ... around the world.
Right.
So a lot of people have emulated what you've done. I mean, it's a fascinating story, obviously, and it lends itself so well to anything and everything that revolves around lifestyle and social media. How does that make you feel, that you've got, the humans of
Right.
Islamabad?
Yeah. Well, it was an evolving process, because you guys got to kind of get into my mind. I'm, living in a very poor neighborhood in New York when I first moved to New York, and I didn't have any money, and I was kind of chasing this dream. I'm sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and I think I've got this great idea that might make me some money one day so I can afford to be a photographer, Humans of New York. Then you start seeing like Humans of London pop up, and you're like, no, like my idea, and that was at the very beginning. And so I'm going to be absolutely honest and say, at first I was worried. And you had people saying, you got to protect your brand, you got to you got to trademark your brand. That's how you do things. That's how you do things. And they got me even more worried. But then, as I kind of grew and matured and the site got bigger, I realized that, it was the fact that the concept was growing, and even that the name was growing, was only helping. And, it was only a matter of time of somebody following Humans of London that they would learn about Humans of New York. And, not only that, but, I think it's a very good concept. I think it's a very good thing for people to go out and not only, I think it's not only good that communities are portrayed, but it's also good for the person who's doing it. It's a very healthy thing to go stop strangers on the street and listen to their stories. I've probably grown more than the website, more than anybody from Humans of New York, just from learning other people's stories. And I think it's great that there's hundreds of other people out there that are doing the same things in their communities. Yeah.
Great. We're still okay for time? We're okay. Great. So my next question is, you wrote somewhere, every time I want to do something, I do it. You started with photography and Humans of New York, and now you've done this world tour. What's next for Brandon and the humans of New York?
Well, there's kind of, there's another book coming out in October, which I'm very excited about. So that all my focus is kind of going into making that as good as possible. After that, there's two things I'm looking to do. I'm looking to travel. I kind of want to do humans of New York, like work in different cities. So I think once the second book comes out, I'm really going to open up and start traveling a lot more. And then I'm working on a film where I'm doing, my photography shift in the morning, and in the evening I'm going out with a cinematographer, and I'm doing these same interviews on film, on video. And I've been getting some, amazing stuff. And my goal is to do that every day for about 2 years in the same way that I've been doing it with photography, and kind of stitch some of these interviews together in a video format. And I would say that those are my, two most immediate goals right now. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Facebook. How is Facebook as a platform support what you're trying to do and trying to get your messages out? And if there's something that you could ask for from Facebook?
Very little, honestly. But I almost respect that. Facebook is very puritanical about not directing people on their platform. One of the developers at Facebook told me, we just want to be paper. We don't want to tell people how to use that paper. We just want to be paper. And so where, as in, Tumblr or some other platforms might promote some of their big creators, Facebook is very hands-off about it. With that being said, Facebook rewards one thing. And when I say Facebook, I don't mean Facebook itself rewards one thing. I mean Facebook's algorithms that kind of govern what shows up on news feeds rewards one thing, and that's content. And it's very democratic that way, and it's like, it's almost caused me some frustration sometimes that, I'm creating original content for 13 billion people on Facebook, and, they don't, they've done some small things, but they don't really push humans of New York at all. And, sometimes I think, they should be doing more, but then I kind of step back from it and I think, it's like the very reason I've been able to get here in the first place is because Facebook does not prioritize anybody based on who they are. They only prioritize content that people want to see. And so, it's very democratic in that way. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So I'm going to go to my final question.
Okay.
And then we're going to take a quick we're not going to take a break, but we're going to just change lenses, and then we're going to open the floor for questions. So there's a lot of negative sort of news that comes out of the Middle East. And, one of the biggest, if not the biggest objective of this summit is really to join forces, bring all the influencers across social media together in one area under one platform to unify the voice and have much more positive content than negative content. Because today it's the other way around, unfortunately, across media and social media. And this is one of the things that we want to do. I mean, there's amazing stories over here. They're just not highlighted.
Right.
The voice is just not loud enough. If you look in history, just from within this part of the world, surgeries, first one here. Coffee, the first flying machine. And what we talked about yesterday, which is probably one of the most important things to all of us here today, algebra, algorithms out of the Middle East. And we talked about that. If we didn't have algorithms, we wouldn't have algebra. If we didn't have algebra, we wouldn't have machines. If we didn't have machines, we wouldn't have computers. If we didn't have computers, we wouldn't have had social media today. So lots of very important things that came out of here. Unfortunately, that voice has dampened a little bit. Tell us, Brandon, how we can do more of what you do. You create these amazing stories. On one side, this is your first trip here in this way, so you've probably seen the UAE and the Middle East in a different light, I assume. How can we put all our voices together? How can we join and grow this noise? And also, I just want to know from you personally, since you've traveled the world and since you've met so many types of people, are human beings more alike than they are different?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is yes. But I think I think there's something beautiful about being different and just being okay with that. I mean, look how you're dressed and look how I'm dressed. It's like differences are, beautiful. And, I think it's not necessarily that we all need to see each other as alike, but seeing each other as different, and that's okay. I think there's a matter of, kind of dignity and respect of other people's choices that, I think is kind of missing in the world. And because maybe, we look at somebody, from across the world and we see somebody dressed different. And then I guess, like you said, we don't, recognize kind of a common humanity in them. And all we see is the differences. And so, but, what you said is, as far as only negative stories coming out of the Middle East or out of Russia, or I'd say that maybe for a lot of people in the Middle East that their view of even America is a lot more negative than what's going on, because so much of our opinion of a place is affected by the stories that are coming out of there. And what you say that you want to happen, which is more positive stories come, it is happening. I think that as social media grows and grows and the walls come down of where we don't have to rely on somebody else to tell our stories anymore. We don't have to rely on the New York Times to tell us about Syria. We don't have to rely on the New York Times to tell us about Dubai. We can, follow you on Twitter, or we can follow you on Facebook and learn about it from people who actually are in Dubai. What you're talking about is already happening, and the thing is to continue on that path and to just continue. And the world's doing it. I mean, look at everybody out with their Instagram right now. It's like we're telling our own stories, and I think the world's becoming a safer place the more and more that happens. And I think events like this and just kind of the natural progression of things, it's going to bring people closer together, just because we're telling our own stories and we're not having other people tell them for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. I think we're going to transition. We're ready to go on the Q&A. So I think we'll open up to you guys. Does anybody have any questions for Brandon?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mariam Majid.
Hi.
I'm a communication director at Dubai Foundation for Women and Children. Actually, we are a shelter for abused women and children.
Wonderful.
And your session yesterday really inspired me. But before I go, I have two questions for you. But before I go there, the time capsule reminded me of a story happened 3 years ago for my children at school, where their teacher came up with an idea and asked the kids, bring anything you want to put in the time capsule in order after 50 years, you will come back to this place and open it up. And they were so excited about it. And at the event, when all of them, they were gathered, and the teacher was so happy and telling them, after 50 years, we'll all be coming here and open it up. And they looked at her and say, miss, it's not gonna happen. You will be dead by that time. So this is the story about the time capsule. So my questions here. You said yesterday that you had the fear of approaching people at the beginning, after you had this fall. So how did people feel about being exposed by taking photo of and telling their stories into the public?
Right.
My second question is, has any of the photos that you have posted was for a cause or to raise awareness for something? Or just was it the photos that you felt that you need to share with the story you need to tell?
Right.
Thank you.
The first question is, how did people feel when you approached them on the street? And obviously that was a very difficult thing when I first started. I didn't know if I would be able to approach a stranger at all and have them let me take their photo. And so a lot of Humans of New York was a learning process of me learning that, one, you can approach strangers on the street, and two, not only can you take their photographs, but people are comfortable with you asking them pretty much anything. I kind of have to take a step back because I've done it so much now. I've done it like 10,000 times that when I start talking with a stranger, I have an expectation that in 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to be talking about something that's very secret and very personal to them, And I almost forget how surprising and amazing it was for me the very first few times that somebody shared something deeply personal with me 3 minutes after I met them. It's like, so it's just been amazing to me to learn that, not only will strangers let you take their photo, not only are they comfortable with talking to you, but if you show a sincere interest and curiosity in their lives, they will answer pretty much any question that you ask about them, no matter how personal it is. That's how, I think much we desire and that's how much we have an impulse to tell our own stories. And to answer your second question, I primarily, almost exclusively, just tell stories very randomly and organically. If I do promote a cause on Humans of New York, it's because I discovered it organically by asking a random stranger for their story. Yeah?
You work very hard. So I wanted to know what makes you get up in the morning and find the next person and find the next person and find the next person and find their stories. I mean, and has there ever been a time where you've just been like, I'm done?
It gets very hard. I've done it every day for, several years now. Some days I just don't want to get out there. I always say, especially during the winter, it's very tough. Like, it gets cold. It's not like Dubai. It gets cold in New York. And not only is it hard for me to be outside, it's hard for everyone else to be outside. And the people that are outside certainly don't want to stop and talk to a stranger about their lives, So I always say that every day at about 2 p.m., I decide that this is going to be the one day that I take off. And then every day at about 4 p.m., I go out and photograph. So it's, a lot of times that it is a struggle to get out there and work every day. But, it's more commitment and discipline and devotion now than it is obsession or passion, which is what it was at the beginning. Right.
Got a question there, and then we'll come back over to this side. Yeah.
Hi, I have this small Canon camera that I take with me when I visit Egypt every summer. Well, I always get fascinated by the people in their natural setting and how they look. But I feel like if I ask them, can I take your picture, I'm going to ruin their natural setting. So what do you do? Like, do you take the picture and then ask them if you can take the picture? Or aren't you afraid of ruining that natural beauty?
Well, the only thing that, only time I won't ask if there's a moment going on that you're going to completely, ruin the natural setting. Like me and Payman, we're talking right now. This is a very artificial setting. But, there gets to be a point that when we're talking, we kind of fall into this natural rhythm and it kind of becomes very natural, just if it was me and him talking in the green room in the back before we came out here. The same thing happens, that when, there's a moment of artificiality when you approach something and there's kind of that awkwardness where you're meeting somebody, but then it kind of just, it evolves into a natural conversation. And there is spontaneity, there is randomness, and there is naturalness within the framework of an interview. And the key is to kind of capture that while we're talking. And, so what I'll do is while I'm talking with somebody, I'll just kind of the camera's down normally for most of the conversation. And then I'll just kind of very casually, like while they're thinking about something, take a quick snap and then keep talking. And the result is that there is a lot of genuine moments that come out of something that is a very kind of structured and staged interaction. Yeah.
We still have a time for one quick question. By the way, there's an awesome video on YouTube of Brandon, and he explains exactly how he approaches everybody. And it's really nice. It's the one where you're in Ireland.
Yeah, no,
really good one. You got to watch that. So YouTube it today. We got time for one more quick question. We'll go with the gentleman over here.
Hi, my name is Noor. I'm working in the social media field, so my question will be specifically in this exactly.
Okay.
So I've seen that you are getting a lot of reach. Are you promoting posts? Are you doing some paid ads, sort of things? Or are you getting this native viral content because the content is really good?
Okay, I heard everything except the very last thing you said. What was the?
The last thing, is it like a native viral content, or are you doing paid?
Yeah, no, I've never paid for advertising. It's completely organic, and yeah, I saw a lot of kind of chatter on the internet recently. We were talking about this beforehand about how Facebook's changed their algorithm now to where if you don't pay money, they've really kind of throttled. Honestly, I haven't noticed that. I was just showing Payman my numbers. And I have 12.5 million fans, one of my last 3 posts went in 13 million news feeds, you know? So it's content, you know? I think what happened is that people, you know, kind of maybe had difficulty when their reach got throttled, kind of looking and saying, you know, was this content something that people really wanted to see? And I think maybe Facebook adjusted an algorithm to be where, you know, we're going to give less randomness and more priority to what people are engaging with. And so, you know, during that time when everybody was talking about organic reach dropping, it's not something that I noticed. You know, I've just always focused on content, and the reach has always been many times greater than 100% of my following. Yeah.
That's really impressive.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Brandon, for being here and for giving us this time.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, guys.